You're sitting at a set of traffic lights. A massive articulated truck rolls up in the lane beside you, slows right down, and just as it comes to a complete stop, you hear it. That loud, sharp hiss. Psst. Almost like the truck has let out an enormous sigh of relief after a long, hard day. And if you have ever sat there wondering what on earth that sound actually is, whether something is leaking, whether something is broken, or whether this 40-ton machine is about to fall apart right there in the middle of the junction, then trust me, you are not alone. It is genuinely one of the most common questions people have about big trucks. And here's the thing, that hiss is not a fault. It is not a leak. It is not the truck struggling. That sound is actually one of the cleverest and most important safety systems ever fitted to a road vehicle, working exactly the way it is supposed to. And by the end of this video, I promise you will never hear that hiss the same way again. Hi, my name is Jeremy, and this is Trucks United. So let us clear up the biggest misunderstanding right away, because almost everyone gets this wrong the first time they think about it. When you hear that hiss, your instinct is probably that something is going wrong. In a car, after all, a hissing noise usually means trouble. A hose has split, the cooling system is leaking, something is escaping that should not be escaping. But on a truck, it is the complete opposite. That hiss is the sound of the system doing its job. It is the sound of compressed air being released on purpose, at exactly the right moment, by a valve that was designed specifically to let that air out. Nothing is broken. Nothing is wrong. In fact, if the truck did not make that sound, that is when a driver would start to worry. To understand why, we need to talk about something that surprises a lot of people. The brakes on a big truck work in a completely different way from the brakes on your car. And once you understand that one difference, the entire mystery of the hiss falls into place. When you press the brake pedal in your car, you are pushing fluid. Your car uses what is called a hydraulic braking system. Your foot presses a piston. That piston squeezes brake fluid through a series of pipes, and that fluid pushes the brake pads against the discs at each wheel. Liquid does not compress, so when you push the pedal, the force travels almost instantly down the lines, and the car slows down. It is simple, it is effective, and for something that weighs a ton or two, it works beautifully. But now imagine trying to use that same system to stop a fully loaded semi-truck weighing 80,000 pounds, which is around 36,000 kilograms. Suddenly, hydraulic brakes start to look like a very bad idea, and for several reasons. So instead of fluid, big trucks use air. Compressed air. And that single decision changes absolutely everything about how the vehicle behaves, including the noise it makes when it stops. Now you might be thinking, why air? Air seems flimsy. Air seems weak. How can something you cannot even see stop 40 tons of moving metal? Well, this is where it gets genuinely clever. The first reason is supply. A hydraulic system has a fixed amount of fluid sealed inside it. If that fluid leaks out, you are in serious trouble, because there is no way to make more of it on the move. If a brake line on a car splits, you can lose your brakes completely, and that is a genuinely terrifying situation. Air, on the other hand, is everywhere. It is free. It is unlimited. A truck carries an air compressor, driven by the engine, that is constantly topping the system back up. So even if there is a small leak somewhere, the compressor can keep making more air to compensate, at least up to a point. The system is far more tolerant of small problems than a sealed liquid system could ever be. The second reason is power. Compressed air can store and deliver an enormous amount of force, and it can do it across a big, heavy vehicle with multiple axles and trailers without needing impossibly thick pipes full of fluid. And the third reason, which is the most important of all, is safety. Because of the way air brakes are designed, a truck with air brakes is built to stop itself even when everything goes wrong. And we will get to exactly how that works, because it is the single most brilliant part of this entire story, and it is directly responsible for one of the hisses you hear. Now, a fair question at this point is, if air brakes are so brilliant and so safe, why does your car not use them? And the answer comes down to scale and response. Air is wonderful for big, heavy vehicles, but it has a downside. Because air can be compressed, there is a tiny delay between pressing the pedal and the brakes actually biting as the air builds up and travels through the system. On a truck, that fraction of a second is managed and completely acceptable, but in a small, light, quick car where you want instant, precise, direct feel under your foot, hydraulic fluid that cannot be compressed gives you a far sharper, more immediate response. A car is also light enough that hydraulics provide more than enough force without any of the bulk. Air brake systems are big, heavy, and complex, with compressors and tanks and dryers and dozens of valves. On a 40-ton truck, that weight and complexity is absolutely worth it for the power and the fail-safe protection. On a 1-ton hatchback, it would be overkill, and it would actually make the car worse to drive. So each vehicle uses the system that fits it best. Hydraulics for the light and nimble, air for the heavy and relentless. It is the same lesson trucks teach us again and again: the right tool for the right job, every time. But first, let us actually walk through the system, because once you can picture the parts, every single sound a truck makes will suddenly make sense. It all starts with the air compressor. This is a pump, driven directly by the engine, and its only job is to squeeze ordinary air from the atmosphere into a much smaller space, putting it under pressure. That compressed air then travels through a component that does not get nearly enough credit, the air dryer. Now this part matters more than you would think. When you compress air, any moisture in it wants to turn into water, and water inside a brake system is bad news. It can corrode metal, it can freeze solid in winter and block valves, and it can generally cause chaos. So the air dryer pulls that moisture out before the air goes any further. Remember the air dryer, because it is the star of one of our hisses later on. From there, the clean, dry, compressed air is stored in a set of strong metal tanks, usually called reservoirs. These tanks are the truck's energy bank. They hold a reserve of pressurized air, typically somewhere between 100 and 125 pounds per square inch, ready to be used the instant the driver needs to brake. And finally, that stored air is delivered to the brakes themselves through a network of valves and lines, ending at a component on each wheel called a brake chamber. The brake chamber is where air pressure gets turned into actual physical stopping force. Air pushes on a flexible rubber diaphragm. The diaphragm pushes a rod. The rod twists a lever, and that applies the brake at the wheel. Compressor, dryer, tanks, valves, chambers. That is the whole chain. Now let us listen to it. Here is the first source of that hissing you hear, and it is the most regular one. The compressor cannot just run flat out forever, pumping air in until the tanks explode. So the system has a clever little component called the governor that watches the pressure in the tanks. When the pressure drops to a certain level, often around 100 pounds per square inch, the governor tells the compressor to cut in and start pumping. And when the pressure climbs back up to the top limit, maybe 125 pounds, the governor tells the compressor to stop pumping and take a break. This is called unloading, and at the exact moment the compressor unloads, the system vents a small puff of air. That is one of the softer, more rhythmic hisses you might hear from a parked truck that has its engine running, a sort of regular psst every now and then as the system tops itself up and then relaxes again. It is the truck quietly managing its own air pressure all day long, completely automatically. The driver does not press a single button to make it happen. But the loud one, the really sharp, sudden, almost violent hiss that makes pedestrians jump. A lot of the time, that is the air dryer doing its job. Remember how I said the dryer pulls moisture out of the compressed air? Well, all that collected water and oil and gunk has to go somewhere. So every time the compressor finishes a cycle and unloads, the air dryer blasts that trapped moisture out through a purge valve in one short, powerful burst of air. That is the loud pop and hiss you hear. Psst! It is essentially the truck clearing its throat, spitting out a mouthful of dirty, wet air so the brake system stays clean and dry inside. If you stand near a parked truck long enough, you will hear it do this every couple of minutes. And honestly, once you know what it is, it stops being annoying and starts being kind of satisfying. That sound is the reason the brakes are not slowly rusting from the inside out. It is preventative maintenance happening live, right in front of you, several times an hour, for free. Now we get to the best part. The single cleverest idea in this entire system, and the source of that big satisfying hiss you hear when a bus or a truck finally parks up and the driver gets ready to climb out. To understand it, I need to ask you a strange question. What holds a truck's parking brake on? In your car, the handbrake works by pulling a cable tight to clamp the brakes. You apply force to lock the wheels. Let go, release the tension, and the brake comes off. A truck does the exact opposite, and it is genius. A truck's parking brakes, often called the spring brakes, are held off by air pressure. Inside those brake chambers on certain wheels, there is an enormous, powerful spring. That spring is permanently trying to slam the brakes on. The only thing stopping it is compressed air pushing against it, holding it back, keeping the brake released so the truck can move. Think about what that means. As long as the system is full of air, the spring is held back and the truck can drive. But the moment that air is released, on purpose or by accident, those massive springs snap the brakes on, hard. So when a driver parks the truck and pulls that yellow diamond-shaped button on the dashboard, they are not applying the brake by adding pressure. They are releasing the air that was holding the spring brakes off. Whoosh! The air rushes out, the springs take over, and the truck is locked solidly in place. That long, drawn-out hiss you hear right as a bus settles at a stop, that is the sound of the spring brakes being set. The air that was keeping them open is being dumped, and the springs are clamping down. It is the truck putting itself to bed. And here is why this design is so completely brilliant. It means the truck's brakes are fail-safe. In your car, if you lose all your brake fluid, you lose your brakes, and the car will keep rolling. That is the nightmare scenario. But on a truck, if the air system fails completely, if a line bursts, if the pressure drops away, the springs are no longer being held back. So instead of losing the brakes automatically apply themselves. A truck that loses all its air pressure does not roll away out of control. It grinds to a halt, because the springs slam on with no air left to stop them. The failure mode of the system is to stop the truck, not to set it free. That is why you can never, ever push a parked truck with no air in its tanks. The springs have it locked. You would need to mechanically wind those springs back by hand, a process drivers call caging the brakes, just to move it an inch. The whole thing is designed around one simple, unbreakable principle. If in doubt, stop. And it has saved an uncountable number of lives because of it. There is another layer of safety built into all of this that is worth pausing on, because it shows just how seriously this is taken. A modern truck does not run on a single air system. It runs on two, sometimes more, completely separate air circuits. The brakes are usually split, often front and rear, into a primary circuit and a secondary circuit, each with its own tanks and its own supply. The reason is simple. If one circuit fails completely, the other one still has enough air to bring the truck to a controlled stop. You do not lose everything at once. It is the same philosophy you see in aircraft, where critical systems are duplicated so that a single failure is never catastrophic. So when you look at the cluster of tanks and valves under a truck, you are not looking at one braking system. You are looking at several overlapping safety nets, all of them breathing compressed air, all of them ready to take over if another one lets go. And every one of them, when it does its job, makes a little noise. So let us go back to that moment at the traffic lights, because now you have everything you need to understand exactly what is happening. When the driver presses the brake pedal to slow down and stop, they are sending compressed air from the tanks down to the brake chambers at each wheel. The air pushes the diaphragm, applies the brakes, and the truck slows. But the instant the driver eases off the pedal, all that air that was used to apply the brakes has to be released so the brakes let go. And it is released quickly, through valves specifically designed to dump it fast, so the brakes do not drag. That sudden release of service brake air, vented through quick release and relay valves right at the wheels, is a big part of the sharp hiss you hear as a truck comes to a stop and the driver feathers the pedal. Every press and release of that pedal moves air in and then lets it straight back out, and letting it out makes noise. So in that one moment at the junction, you might actually be hearing several different things at once. The service brakes venting as the driver adjusts the pedal, the compressor cutting in to replace the air that was just used, the air dryer purging, and if the driver is parking up, the spring brakes being set on top of all of it. It is a whole orchestra of compressed air, and now you can pick out the individual instruments. And here is a bonus one, because the place most people hear this hiss is not actually next to a truck, it is at a bus stop. Buses use air for more than just their brakes. Many city buses also have air suspension, and a feature called kneeling, where the bus lowers the front step down towards the curb to make it easier for passengers to get on. When a bus does that, it releases air from the suspension on one side, and yes, that makes a hiss too. So at a busy bus stop, you might be hearing the brakes being set, the suspension kneeling down to let people on, and then, a moment later, the hiss of it standing back up again as it refills with air and pulls away. The humble city bus is basically a rolling pneumatic concert, and most passengers never give it a second thought. Air is not just stopping these vehicles. On a bus, it is holding the body up, cushioning the ride, and lowering the floor for a passenger with a pushchair, all at the same time. That is how versatile compressed air is once you commit to building a vehicle around it. None of this, by the way, is new. The basic idea is well over 150 years old. Back in 1869, a young American inventor named George Westinghouse patented the air brake, and he did it not for trucks, which barely existed, but for railways. Before his invention, stopping a train relied on brakemen physically running along the carriages turning brakes by hand, which was as dangerous and unreliable as it sounds. Westinghouse's air brake transformed rail safety almost overnight, and crucially, he later develops the fail-safe version, the one where loss of air applies the brakes automatically rather than releasing them. That single principle, brakes that apply themselves when the system fails, is the same idea sitting inside every heavy truck on the road today. The technology has been refined endlessly, the materials have changed, the valves have become far more sophisticated, but the core concept that makes a truck hiss when it stops is a Victorian-era idea that turned out to be so good we never needed to replace it. We just kept improving it. Now, like any system, air brakes can have their problems, and understanding them tells you even more about those sounds. The most common issue is a leak. A small air leak is not an immediate emergency because the compressor can usually keep up. But if a leak gets bad enough that the compressor cannot replace the air fast enough, the pressure in the tanks starts to fall. Every truck has a warning system for exactly this. When the pressure drops below a certain threshold, typically around 60 pounds per square inch, a loud buzzer sounds and a warning light comes on in the cab. This is the truck telling the driver, "You have a serious problem, stop now while you still can." Because if the pressure keeps falling, eventually it reaches the point where it can no longer hold those parking spring brakes off, and they will apply themselves automatically, bringing the truck to a stop whether the driver likes it or not. Drivers are trained to pull over and park safely the moment that low air warning sounds, precisely so the brakes do not decide to do it for them at the worst possible moment. Cold weather brings its own drama. If the air dryer is failing and moisture gets into the system, that water can freeze in the valves overnight, and a driver can wake up to brakes that are frozen on or behaving strangely. This is exactly why that humble air dryer and its regular purging hiss matter so much. It is quietly preventing a frozen disaster every single night. Which brings us neatly to maintenance, because keeping an air brake system healthy is all about managing that one enemy, moisture. At the bottom of those air tanks are drain valves, and part of a thorough driver's routine, especially in older trucks without automatic systems, is to open those drains and let out any water that has collected. If you have ever seen a driver crouched under their truck pulling a little cable or valve and getting a spray of air and water for their trouble, that is exactly what is happening. They are draining the tanks. On modern trucks, the air dryer handles most of this automatically with its purging, which is why you hear that sharp hiss so regularly. The dryer cartridge itself needs replacing periodically because the material inside that absorbs the moisture eventually wears out. Skip that, and moisture starts getting through, and the problems begin. None of this is glamorous. It is not the kind of thing that makes the brochure. But a well-maintained air system is the difference between a truck that stops reliably for 1,000,000 miles and one that lets you down on a wet, freezing night when you need it most. And every one of those hisses is a small clue about whether that system is healthy or not. Experienced drivers can genuinely diagnose problems by ear, just from the rhythm and the sharpness of the sounds their truck makes. So where is all of this heading? You might assume that with electric trucks coming, the hiss is on its way out. After all, no diesel engine, no engine-driven compressor, surely no air. But here's the thing that surprises a lot of people. Electric trucks still use air brakes. The fundamental reasons have not changed. You are still trying to stop an enormous, heavy vehicle. You still need a fail-safe system, where loss of power applies the brakes rather than releasing them, and air is still the best way to do that across multiple axles and trailers. What changes is how the air gets made. Instead of a compressor bolted to a diesel engine, an electric truck runs its air compressor off an electric motor, drawing from the battery. Electric trucks also lean heavily on regenerative braking, using the electric motors themselves to slow the vehicle and recover energy, which means the air brakes do less of the everyday work. But for serious stopping, for parking, and above all for that fail-safe protection, the air system stays. So the next generation of trucks will be quieter in almost every way. No rumbling diesel, no roaring exhaust. But that sharp little hiss when they stop? That is sticking around. It is simply too good an idea to give up. So before we wrap up, let me give you a quick field guide, so the next time you are near a truck, you can actually play along and identify what you are hearing. If you hear a sharp, single, powerful pop and hiss from a parked truck with its engine running, repeating every minute or two, that is almost certainly the air dryer purging. If you hear a softer, more rhythmic little psst that comes and goes, that is the compressor and governor cycling as the system tops up its pressure. If you hear a series of short, sharp hisses as a truck rolls to a stop at a junction, that is the service brakes venting through their valves as the driver works the pedal. And if you hear one long, deep, drawn-out whoosh, usually followed by the driver opening the door, that is the big one. That is the spring parking brakes being set, the air dumped, the truck locking itself down for the night. 4 different sounds, 4 different jobs, all of them perfectly normal. All of them a sign of a healthy truck doing exactly what it should. Once you can tell them apart, you genuinely cannot unhear it. You will be standing at bus stops mentally narrating the brakes for the rest of your life. Sorry in advance for that. So let us bring it all back to where we started, standing at those traffic lights. That loud hiss you hear every time a truck stops is not a fault, not a leak, and definitely not the truck falling apart. It is compressed air, the lifeblood of the entire braking system, being released on purpose by valves doing exactly what they were designed to do. It might be the air dryer clearing out moisture in one sharp burst. It might be the service brakes venting as the driver works the pedal. It might be the compressor cycling as the governor manages the pressure. And that long, satisfying whoosh when a bus finally parks up. That is the spring brakes being set, the air released, the springs locking the vehicle safely in place. Every single one of those sounds is a piece of a system built around one beautiful idea. When something goes wrong, the truck should stop, not run away. It is over 150 years old, it is endlessly clever, and it is hiding in plain sight, or rather in plain hearing, every single day. So the next time a truck pulls up beside you and lets out that big sigh of compressed air, you will know exactly what it is saying. It is just telling you it has arrived safely, and it is putting the brakes on, the smartest way ever invented. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because we break down stuff like this every single week here at Trucks United. And I want to know, before you watched this, did you think that hiss meant something was broken? Be honest, drop it in the comments below. And while you were there, tell me, what other truck sound or quirk has always made you curious? Maybe it will be the subject of our next video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.